Welcome everyone to this webinar on batch editing barcodes in the ArchivesSpace API. In this webinar, Vakil Smallen will walk through the steps of a workflow developed at George Washington University for batch editing barcodes in ArchivesSpace through the API. As a person with limited technical background, Vakil will discuss how he found a solution to a common problem using tools previously unknown to him. He'll offer ideas for others to get confidence and learn more when wading into similarly unfamiliar waters. Vakil originally highlighted this workflow in a blog post for the Research Library section of SAA. In that post and in the description of this webinar available via the ArchivesSpace blog, Vakil includes all programs and resources he used in this process, including Python 3.7 and Jupyter Notebook as available in the Anaconda suite and OpenRefine. The Python scripts used in this webinar are also included in the webinar description and posted to GitHub. We will hold all questions until the Q&A session at the end of this webinar. If you type a question into the chat, it will be read and answered during the Q&A. You will notice your microphone and camera were muted when you entered. We ask that you keep your microphone muted until the Q&A session at the end. Your presenter today is Vakil Smallen. Vakil is the International Brotherhood of Teamsters Labor History Archivist at George Washington University, a position he has held since April 2019. Before that, he was the National Education Association Project Archivist at George Washington University for 8 years. He received his MLS from the University of Maryland. Vakil's undergraduate degree was in English Literature and Language. Welcome, Vakil.
Hello, everyone. So I should start by saying I'm not going to be using slides for the presentation. Rather, I'm going to be sort of actively working with the resources that Jessica mentioned. There are some slides, however, that I will be sharing with lyricists and they can share afterwards with everyone who's attending today. Those slides just include links to all the resources. And as Jessica said, those links are available elsewhere as well in the original blog post that I wrote on GitHub. In the meantime, while I talk a little bit about the presentation, I'm just gonna leave this page up so that everyone can get my contact information. Feel free to follow up with me if something didn't make sense or you tried something and it didn't work. I should say, if you follow up with me, as Jessica mentioned, my technical background is limited. I'm not a programmer, but I suspect that many of my colleagues are not either. And so I learned how to do this solution to a problem we had, and I wanted to share this with others so that anyone who's having a similar problem can, or maybe wants to expand on what I work with, can take this and run with it and hopefully do some of this work themselves with their own local archive space. So I'll start by talking a little bit about and I guess I should say, I guess Jessica, can you monitor the chat? If anyone can't hear me, if I'm not coming across clearly, just let me know. But I will start with providing a background of my project. So in Gelman Library Special Collections at George Washington University, we used to have Archivist Toolkit. And in Archivist Toolkit, we had a lot of legacy data that included collections that had the same box number repeated over and over, lots of boxes without barcodes, other forms of incomplete data. When we migrated to ArchivesSpace infrastructure, as many of you probably know, includes the container, this sort of new piece of data that didn't really exist in Archivist Toolkit. And this presented a new difficulty for migrating data from Archivist Toolkit to ASpace for us. We did kind of jerry-rig a temporary solution that prevented separate containers from being merged together in the transfer. So I'd mentioned we had things where one collection had repeated the same box number, just in different series. And so we came up with a sort of solution that managed to make those containers not merge, but we still had a lot of problems of shared boxes being considered separate containers by ArchivesSpace. We also, shortly after we migrated to ArchivesSpace, our ILS migrated from Voyager to Alma. And where we had barcodes that were missing in ArchivesSpace, we had as I said, lots of containers that didn't have barcodes. Voyager was where all of our barcodes reliably lived. And it turned out to not be the case, but at the time during the transfer, we were worried that we would lose the ability to find individual barcodes in Alma. Ultimately, that proved not to be true, but you can never be certain when you have these massive data migrations, right? So we needed to find a way to get all of the barcodes into ArchivesSpace that we had in Voyager. So we had thousands of barcodes missing from tens of thousands of archival objects. It was impossible to hand edit. There's no way we could have done it. So we had to find a way to batch edit these records. So what I did was take on this project to look and see if there was a way to do some automated form of batch editing barcodes through the API. And if anyone's unfamiliar with that term, an API means application programming interface, I think is the term if I'm recalling correctly. And it is basically a way to interface with an application, with a program, kind of through the back end, rather than through the sort of staff interface, the GUI, the things that we normally interact with when we're interacting with a program. And it allows you to do, oftentimes you can do things through the API that you can't do through the regular staff interface because those options weren't included. So I'm going to go ahead and exit the slides here of that, and I'm going to start with the tools that we are going to be using. And as Jessica mentioned, the tools that I used for this are the Anaconda suite and OpenRefine. Both are free, available online. I include links to where you can download them in the slides that will be shared after. So if you can't find them, you can click those links and download them. One thing to note, Anaconda suite is where you're going to be working with Python. You will need Python 3.7 if you are trying to duplicate the work that I've done here, because the scripts that I've written are for Python 3, not Python 2, which presented a problem for me that I'll go into later on, the difference between those. Just make sure that you get Python 3 when you download Anaconda. So the first thing we're going to be doing is starting with a Python script, and you're going to do that in Jupyter Notebook. So if you see here on the screen, you'll see where it says Jupyter Notebook. You can click Launch. I've already got it launched, so I won't click it. And that will open up your Jupyter Notebook interface, which is just a place where you have all your various programs that can work with. It's not just Python. It has lots of different programs that I can interface with. You'll see if you look down my list here, you'll see CSV files, JSON files, lots of things in there. Native Python, you'll see some .py in a couple of places. These IPyNB is a Jupyter Notebook version of Python. So when you see IPyNB, you need to open it in Jupyter Notebook. So just to make that clear. So one thing to note about Python before we get started on writing our script is that Python is kind of a base programming language, but it includes, there are all these additional things that are called libraries that come with Python in general. And these libraries, they offer functions that are not easy to do or not possible to do in kind of native standard Python. There are lots of different versions of these libraries. The reason I recommend downloading the Anaconda suite for this is that it comes automatically with all of the libraries that you're going to need. You don't have to go and load those. And so if you go to your Anaconda Navigator page, where I am right here, and you click on the left where it says Environments, you will see here the list of environments that you have installed. So I don't know why this is, won't let me scroll over. But anyway, so some of the libraries that we'll be working with, for instance, are requests. You'll see requests is there, JSON is there. So just some examples of libraries that come pre-installed. If a library, for some reason, is missing, there is a way to install it. I'm not going to go through that now, but if you do a little searching around, you can find the rules for installing. And in fact, in my original blog post, I did include the steps you go through to install a library that's missing from your local version of Anaconda. So you can go there and read it and find it. But what we're going to do now is just create a new script. And so I actually have the script open, so I'm not going to actually create the script, but I'll show you how you do it. You click over here where it says new, and you see it says Python 3, because I have, my Anaconda version is Python 3, not Python 2. And so you would do that, and you'll see what it creates. I'll just show you what it creates. This is your blank page that you work with. But I am working with, this is the sort of finished version of what we'll be working with, just to show you how it looks through. And so what I'm going to do is walk through the scripts that I've written, kind of explain some of the language that's written into them, the purpose of it, the things you need to edit or change for your native, version, whatever you're doing with ArchivesSpace locally. Yeah, and then we'll show you through. I'm not going to be able to actually run them to the point that they do what they're supposed to do, because there's things that I can't show, like my secret login information, things like that. So I'm not going to be able to actually complete the script, but I'll show you what happens when you actually run a script and what the steps should go through and everything, and explain what you're seeing here. So the first thing to note, if we go back to our page, before we start, I should have mentioned this before, throughout this project, the location of all of the scripts and CSV files that you're going to be working with is really vital. If you run a Python script that is located in this folder, you have to make sure that whatever documents are associated with that script, for instance, the CSV files that we'll be running later, are located in the same folder all the time. And so that's important when you go into OpenRefine. We're going to work with OpenRefine to download a CSV. OpenRefine does not download necessarily, it downloads just to your download folder. At least it does for me. I assume it does for everyone else as well. So you have to make sure you go in and move things to their appropriate folder location, which you can see on Jupyter Notebook right across the top. It just has the breadcrumbs here. So you can see I've got mine is in a folder called Barcode Project that's down on my desktop in these folders here. So you can always see that across the top. So whenever you are, whatever folder location you're going to be working with, make sure you're there, and you can get there if you just go on here. You can see you've got your little folder icon. Click there, it takes you to there in Jupyter Notebook, and then create your new there so that it will actually create it in the appropriate location. So I do have the script on GitHub. So this is the GitHub script that I'm working with now, but GitHub is acting very funny for me right now, and it won't load the rendered version, as you can see here. So all it will load is this, which is the sort of, I think, like the raw Python, which I don't understand, don't know how to work with, and I don't know how you would get that into Jupyter Notebook. So unfortunately, I can't show you what it would look like on GitHub. Hopefully it works if you go to GitHub and are trying to work with it. And if it's not, if people are continuing to have the same difficulty, maybe I can load a new script or something. I guess just email me and let me know. But anyway, I can't work with that now, but I can show you the script here. So the first script that we're going to work with is you have to pull a list of every container that you want to work with for your project from ArchivesSpace. And so if you are in ArchivesSpace, there's a URL for each container. If you click on that container and open it up, and that is sort of the unique identifier for that container. And basically what you're doing now is you are pulling a list of that unique identifier for every container that you need to put a barcode to. And then we're going to go through the process of merging the two lists of barcodes and containers together, and then reposting that back to ArchivesSpace. So that is the steps here. So the first thing we know here is with these cells, the first thing to note is with the cells is that what you're seeing here with this sort of, this little green border here is a cell. We call a cell in Jupyter Notebook. And it's very important that you run these cells in order, 1, 2, 3. You don't want to run them out of order. You don't want to skip one. The reasons being that they will sort of load terms kind of into the script that are later going to come into use. So make sure you do that when you cut. So if you cut and paste, I can't show you again in GitHub. When you cut and paste, make sure you cut and paste the individual cells into their own cells and then run them as so. So the first thing we're going to do is I mentioned those libraries that we have to import. And so here what we're doing is we're telling the script to go and pull these two libraries, because we need specific language from those libraries in order to run the script. So what you do each time you want to actually run a script is make sure your cursor is in that script and you press run. And you'll see here, it said 2 before because I ran this earlier as a test. And I never kind of unran it. But you see now it says 1. That means it's saying, okay, you have initiated this cell. And so now you can go to your next cell here. And so this one, I can't actually run because I can't put my password and everything in my local port for ArchivesSpace into a public webinar, but you get the idea. So what you would put in here is just your username for logging into ArchivesSpace, your password for logging into ArchivesSpace, and then host refers to the URL. Host is the URL of the ArchivesSpace. And it doesn't necessarily have to say user, pass, and host. All we are doing here is identifying these terms or defining these terms. So, I mean, you can name this A, B, and C as long as you remember later on to use A, B, and C appropriately. It's just easier if you name them something that you can refer to again. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you see these red kind of quote marks, the term needs to stay inside those quote marks, because in Python, that is telling you, it's saying that, you know, that's defined, I guess, for lack of a better word. So I'm going to run this. It won't actually do anything, but you'll see all it's going to do is leave these terms undefined. It'll still run the cell. So you'll see now it says 2. It's saying this is the second cell that ran. This next one is, so ArchivesSpace paginates the lists of, I guess, containers, probably everything. So that as you're cycling through, you know, it needs to know sort of how many times it cycles through everything. And so you'll see here that these, again, are terms. They're just terms that we're defining, just like user, pass, and host was defined. Last page is just a term we've defined. We could, again, name it A and B or whatever. And so last page means that page 250, when it reaches that point, it should stop searching, with the idea that it gets 150 results per page. And so if you add that up, it comes out to 3,700 or 37,500 total containers. So this is basically just this ensures that you are getting your full count of all your containers. If you don't know how many containers you have in total, I mean, you know, I only knew this because the person who actually helped me write the script, she knew already. So she told me, you know, that is the total that we have. So anyway, you may have to run it a few times if you find, you know, you're not getting enough results. The other thing to keep in mind, and I don't know if this is true or not, is that, you know, as you see here, we have 31,000 containers, and this is saying to look for 37,000 containers. I don't know if that means it's going to go back through and return a second result for some of those containers. So you may end up with duplicate URIs. Again, I don't know if that's actually going to be the case, but something to keep in mind. So we can run this one, and we'll see here. So we've now defined all the terms that we're going to use. And so now we're actually going to work with those terms. So this one here, I'll run it, but it's not actually going to work. And I can run it and you can see sort of what the error looks like. But it is saying it's, you know, basically what it is saying is going to ArchivesSpace and requesting a sort of a login access. And so if you look here, it says headers equals a space auth host user pass. And those are the things that we put up here before. So what it's saying is return an authorization from ArchivesSpace that this person can actually log in. But since I haven't defined those terms, you know, I don't even have a URL for it to refer to here. It's just going to say this doesn't, these are undefined, this doesn't mean anything. So we can run that and we'll see what we get. Yeah, there you go. And so you'll see you get this error message here. And so one thing to keep in mind, and this was super helpful for me when I was doing this work, that I had to go through and kind of find things in some of these scripts, because I didn't write these scripts. You know, this one was written for me by a colleague, And there's another one that I got from Johns Hopkins University. And in both cases, I just had to kind of change a few things here and there. And as I say, I'm not a programmer, but the great thing that Jupyter Notebooks does is it tells you there's an error right here. Here's the type of error. It's a missing schema. And here is the location of the error. And you can Google what the errors mean to try and figure out what it's trying to tell you, what's wrong. But that's an important thing to keep in mind is you can go in and do little edits to see what works, see what's broken, because it'll tell you what needs to be fixed, what's not working. Just an important thing to keep in mind. If it had worked, you would get, instead of this long error message, you would just get this message that says X ArchivesSpace session at the bottom. It would just print what you see here, headers. See where it says print headers? Headers equals X ArchivesSpace session. And it would just print that. And then I think it gives you your long, like a long string, a long login string or something. Anyway, and then this last one is all that other stuff is set up. You defined your terms, you logged in, and then this last one is the actually pulling the containers. And so a lot of this stuff are things that I don't, this is stuff that I don't necessarily understand everything here, like what the request code necessarily means, but some of the things are pretty straightforward, right? So page equals 1 is saying page number 1. And that while page is less than or equal to last page, which we identified up here as 250, so while page is less than 250, continue to do this search, right? And so the search here is here where it says for container and containers, if container collection, if, and so this is all kind of setting it all up. And then here is your search term where you see these X's. And so all you have to do is go in here and edit this to whatever your search term you want to be. And it will pull it and it will write it to a document in the same container or the same folder location that this script is for you, to this document, whatever you name this. So these things are things that you just rename as appropriate. You can, if you're working with the Washington, D.C. collection, you just say Washington, D.C. containers.jsonl here, and you maybe say if Washington or if Washington, D.C. or whatever term works. Now, I should mention that when I first ran this, I think we had ArchivesSpace 2.3, and I was able to put in the identifier into the search term, and that returned results. Later, we upgraded to ArchivesSpace 2.5 or migrated to ArchivesSpace 2.52, I think. And I tried doing it a second time, and it no longer worked. So you may have to play around a little bit to try and, I think I had to do like a, the collection title, like a word in the collection title or something to get my hits. So you may have to play around and try different search terms to see what you want to get. But you'll see down here, the last thing is it says page equals page plus 1. And so what this is saying is every time you run it, you page equals 1, add 1 to that, page 2, page 3, and continue to go until you get to page 250. So one thing to keep in mind with this, it's got to cycle through a lot of times. You may want to give yourself a little bit of time. Your computer is going to be kind of busy for a bit while it's running. What I would do is I would run it right before I left for the day. I did make the mistake, though, of not setting my computer to not fall asleep before I ran it. So just make sure you do that. But that's how you pull your list of containers. So the next thing you need to do is you need to get a list of barcodes. I don't know how, everyone else has different ILS. We've got Alma. Alma is real easy to just export a list of barcodes from a collection. But you need those to be as a CSV. So one thing to keep in mind is, this is where OpenRefine is going to come in. If you have a list of barcodes in a CSV file or even in an Excel spreadsheet, this isn't universally the case, but this happens a lot, is if you open it in Excel, it shortens the barcodes, and and if you save it then as a CSV, it'll save that shortened version of the barcode to the CSV file. So you actually won't have barcodes. It'll be like a couple of numbers, and then it'll say like plus E or something. And so that could definitely mess up what you're working with and can cause some problems for you. So I definitely recommend not opening any of these barcode lists in Excel and using OpenRefine and other things like WordPad, Notepad to check the CSVs when you're done. But all you need to do with OpenRefine is, you just choose your file here. And so what you're going to have when you get your file exported from ArchivesSpace is you're going to have a JSON file of, here we go, JSON file of containers, okay? And it's a CSV file. And you're going to have a JSON file of the containers, and it's not going to be readable, human readable. So you are going to have to go into into OpenRefine and create a CSV from those. And so if you go in OpenRefine, a lot of you are probably familiar with this. If you just click on JSON files here, right when you're telling it what the format of what you're uploading is, click on this upper left-hand corner, and it will turn this kind of into a workable list for you. And so all you need to do here is, I'll create the project just to show you. All you need to do here is export to a CSV, but you're going to do a custom tabular exporter. You don't want to just export the whole thing because you only need a little bit of information. So you click export to custom tabular exporter, you select all you need is the URI and the indicator. The URI being the, as I was saying earlier, the unique identifier. And then you export it, and then you will get something that looks like this. And so this is an example of something that I've exported previously. And so I open this, as you can see in WordPad, so that it's not going to mess up with, this doesn't have barcodes, but just good practice, it's not going to mess anything up. And you'll see at the top here, I've got these headers, indicator and URI. When you have your list of barcodes with the CSV, they're also going to have headers. And so the thing that we're going to go into the next script we're going to do is it's a Python script that'll allow you to merge the containers and the barcodes as long as they have a common field. And so that common field in this case is the box number, the indicator or the box number. It's very important when you're doing that the headers be exactly the same. So I'll show you an example here. You'll see here is an example of the completed CSV of what we're about to do. And you'll see here that it says URI and indicator, but there is no dash in front of here, like there is here. You'll see there's this dash in front of URI, the space in this dash. You need to make sure that the characters are exactly alike when you're running the script so that it will actually work. So, having done all of that, you've got your two CSV files, you've got your list of barcodes that have the box numbers on them, you've got your list of URIs that have the box numbers on them. You then go and you merge. Here we go. This is the one that works, yeah. And you can actually go into this script here and you can merge the two files together as one file. And so this one is very, it's much quicker and much easier. Again, you are importing a library. In this case, it's pandas. And so you're not just importing it, you're also saying importing pandas as PD. That's just so you don't have to keep doing pandas over and over. You can see here, they've just got this PD read _CSV. It just makes things easier. But you run your first script here, and it's taking a while. Maybe I need to clear all outputs. But anyway, yeah, you see you can run there, and then you just run the second one. All that you need to put in here, again, only the red text is what needs to be edited. So you put the title of your first CSV, again, located in the same folder that this script is, your second CSV, and then you say what is the common term that you're going to find in both so that you can match this list with that list, and then you give it an output. and then it's going to create an output, and your output will look like this. So this is an output of what you're ultimately going to get. You've got your barcodes, which the header of which is real in this case, your indicator, which is your box number, which I don't know why it says 3.0. That's funny that it says that. It might have done something in there, but the indicator no longer matters. We don't need that for the next step. And then your repositories with your URI here. Once that's done, you take the post barcodes, yeah. Once that's done, you take your final script that has all the barcodes and the URIs. You put it again in the same folder that this post barcodes script is in. And then you're going to run your final script here, which will actually post the material to ArchivesSpace. Now, the first script that we ran, the one where we were pulling containers, was not editing any data in ArchivesSpace. All it was doing was pulling information. It was called a GET request. So it's just getting information from ArchivesSpace. It's not changing anything in ArchivesSpace. So it doesn't really matter if you ran it against your production or not. This one, you're actually going in and you're editing the data in ArchivesSpace. And so it's very important that you make sure that it edits the way you want it to. And so I really recommend, before you actually run this on your production version of ArchivesSpace, that you run it against a test instance if you have a test instance, and make sure that test instance exactly matches just the environment of your production instance. So you can go in and you can double check that you didn't break something by posting this data to it. Anyway, definitely important thing to keep in mind. So, but you've got your script in the same folder as this. Now we're going to run this, and so you'll see here, you've got, again, you're importing these different libraries, JSON, requests, time. In this case, time, this was a script that I copied from Johns Hopkins. I'm not sure why this time is in here. Basically, it's just saying at the end to tell us how long it took to do this. I'd left it in because one of the things I learned is don't take things out of scripts, if you don't know what you're doing, because it can be very hard to, you might break something and not understand what you broke. But just go in and you're importing these libraries. So as before, we run that, and then we'll just run this. So we have something there. Again, we have our username, our password, and our host that we're going to put this information in to do the same thing, or we're going to say, give us access to ArchivesSpace. Tell us if we have authorized access to ArchivesSpace. One thing to mention, and I forgot to mention with the first script, is that this host here, it's probably the case with you. I don't know the technicalities of how this works everywhere. We have to put a port in when we do the host. So the host is, it's just the URL of ArchivesSpace, and then it's a colon, and then your port number. And so usually you'll talk to your IT department or whoever kind of handles that for you to understand what your port should be for ArchivesSpace. Just keep that in mind. And we have an added term being defined here, base URL. And base URL is the same thing basically as host. It's just your ArchivesSpace URL. But the reason that we need to put it in separately, we'll go in it again, is we have to have it defined separately here, and I'll explain why at the bottom. But we have this cell, we run it, and then we do the same thing here where we run our authorized access. I'm not going to do it again because we'll just get the same error message, but that you would run that as well. Again, you would get an X ArchivesSpace session and a long string saying that you're in. Now we're running the actual script to say, are you going to run correctly? So excuse me. So it has this test connection bit at the beginning. Again, that came with it, and I just left it in. But this is not sort of necessary, I think, to the running of the script, but I left it in because I didn't know what I was doing with deleting it. So the first thing that's sort of important is you're telling it to go and open this CSV, and the CSV you put in that has your barcodes and URIs, to open it up and to read it, and then to go in and pull terms from that CSV. For row and reader, URI equals row URI, and then you're saying here, base URL plus the URI is what you're going to pull. And so base URL, again, up here, we defined our term. Base URL plus URI is going to be the URL for every container. But we can't do host plus URI because host included the port in it. So we have to create a separate term for base URL. But so what you're basically saying to ArchivesSpace through the script is to go to every single container in this list that we've got with our base URL and URI, and go to the barcode and go from the row real in output CSV, you are putting that into the barcode field of the container. And then it runs, and it's been so long since I've run it, I think what it says is this post complete, and then it says how long it took to run because that time bit was added in there. And then you're done, and you go into your version of ArchivesSpace, hopefully your test instance first, and just check that everything everything worked, everything posted properly, and then you can run it again in production and see if it actually worked there as well. And that's pretty much it. That's the steps that you'll need to follow. I hope I explained it well. And yeah, Jessica, if you want to unmute people now, I can answer any questions that anyone might have.
Awesome. Yeah, thank you, Vakil. That was great. And as a history major with an MLS, I really appreciate the learning curve that you probably had. But if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourself and ask them, or put them in the chat. If you chat them, I'll read them, and Vakil can answer them. And Vakil, just so you know, as it turns out, the person that wrote the John Hopkins script is actually in the audience. So now's your chance to ask about time.
Great.
But I will ask while we wait for questions in the chat. Since you did have to do, it was a lot of work to learn how to do this and to get comfortable doing this. Do you have plans for future use of the API in ArchivesSpace?
Well, so we had a kind of have had a separate issue with our test instance, and we're sort of working on getting a test instance again. So we haven't managed to post, like we had started this project and had posted some barcodes, and then the test instance kind of conked out on us. So we couldn't go and complete that project by continuing to do this because, as I was saying, you always want to make sure in test instance everything is done first just to check. So that sort of will continue. We'll get back into that and continue with that. But yeah, I enjoyed learning this. It wasn't something that necessarily came easy to me. And I did, there are things like Code Academy that you can go into and learn Python. And I did kind of give that a go. And it's difficult, because it reminds me a lot of math in like high school and college math, where you had all these equations, and the math was really all about remembering when each equation was the appropriate time to use each equation. And I feel like Python and programming in general is like that as well. It's like there's all kinds of different terminologies that you have to use: parentheses, periods, two equal signs, quote marks, all these things that it can be difficult sometimes to remember what goes where. But I did kind of enjoy when you pick something up, when you start to pick something up and you're like, oh, that's right, that's supposed to do this. That was fun. And so I would definitely like to follow up with it in the future. But right now I don't have a defined thing I want to do. But if one comes along, I definitely would pursue it. So.
Cool. So you use this to bulk edit your barcodes. And you may not even know this, but in theory, could I use this to bulk add barcodes as long as I already have the top containers?
Yeah, and when I say bulk edit, I sort of meant in any way, shape, like you can add You can edit if you have, because we have the case where we had, when I mentioned about how we had those repeated box numbers and collections, and we wanted to make sure we didn't merge them, we had to create these kind of fake barcodes that got assigned. Someone in our scholarly technologies department wrote a script that sort of went in and went through through all the containers and basically assigned fake barcodes to them. And so in that case, we had to actually edit them with real barcodes. But we also had a lot of cases where we had no barcodes, and so in that case, we had to add barcodes. So yes, it will do both. It worked in both situations for me. So. And so I'm curious, with the person from Johns Hopkins, what was when you put the time in, what was the purpose, I guess, that was serving?
Hi, this is Laura Woodford, formerly of Johns Hopkins, now with.
Hello. Thank you. You were incredibly helpful to my work, so thank you very much.
Would rather be helpful than harmful. I'm sure there's some of that too. It really is just simply metrics to be able to say, like, we ran this script. It took 22 seconds, and in those 22 seconds, we did something that would have taken student workers or a staff member, X number of days to do. It's a doesn't hurt, might help sort of thing. It's a pretty low bar thing that we needed.
I was very lucky in that I had a lot of support where it wasn't, someone basically said, in my department basically said, take this on, and, don't worry too much about the time limits or anything. Like, we need someone in the department that can handle this, so you just kind of take it on. So I didn't have to really worry about justifying it to anyone. So that was useful and helpful. But yeah. So yeah, your script. I mean, without that script being posted to GitHub, I don't think I could have completed this. I mean, I never would have been able to.
Yeah. Thank you. And to stand in my sandbox or soapbox, we actually never used the script. It didn't actually fit our needs because our data cleanup wasn't that simple. Okay. But I had gotten far enough along with writing it that I thought it might be useful to some people. So that's why we posted it. So I know I hear a lot from people that they don't want to put their work in GitHub because it's not good enough, or it's too unique to their situation, or, I really am not a coder. I don't know what I'm doing. That's a kind of perfect case in point where we didn't actually use it in production. It didn't suit our needs, but I spent the time to do it. And it ended up going into a workshop that I did a couple times with a former colleague, Valerie Adnesio. And so, yeah, that's why there's actually all those comments in there about, this does this, and printing instructions and all of that. We went in and kind of tidied it up and added all of those instructions and made it very as readable as a script can be, because we were intending to teach with it in a workshop.
Okay, cool. Well, I'm definitely glad you did it. It was definitely helpful. And yeah, I mean, that's sort of why I did this too, is I just thought, here's something that works for me. And, I feel like in this profession, these technical skills are becoming more and more important all the time. And any capacity to do them and share them with others, I think, is always valuable. So that was my whole thinking behind doing this blog post and this webinar and everything. So glad you did that, and glad you put it to GitHub. And thank you very much.
And thank you.
Well, that's awesome. Yeah, and to both of your point, if any of you are listening and you have something that you're working on and you would like to share, please let me know. I won't make you do a webinar like I made Vakil, but sharing resources is very important. We do have a question in the chat. Maggie asked, if I understand correctly, this will replace barcodes within a specific collection. Could this or do you plan on using it to edit barcodes for multiple collections at one time?
So what this script, the post barcodes base script that I have on the page here, will do is it will add a barcode for every container that you have in your CSV, right? So you, if you have multiple collections, if you have a CSV that has multiple collections listed in it, then yes, it will edit those. If you have every single container in ArchivesSpace, presumably it will work. I haven't tried it with anything that large. Presumably it will go in and it will edit the barcode for every single barcode in all of your containers in all of ArchivesSpace. So you're only limited by the CSV file that you are putting up. Now, just because you don't want to mess, again, you are batch editing potentially tens of thousands of records, hundreds of thousands of records. I mean, if you're talking about everything in ArchivesSpace. So, this is why we were limiting it to collections specifically, because then you're kind of working with a really defined group. Because as you saw with the merging, when you are merging barcodes and URIs for containers, the only kind of common denominator that I was able to identify from our data, at least, I don't know about other people, was box numbers. And box numbers are going to be repeated over and over and over, right? So if you do something that way, I don't know how you are going to ensure that you have the correct barcode attached to the correct container. But if you manage to solve that problem, then sure, you could do lots at a time. You could also, what we've been doing is just go in and run the script over and over again for each collection. Maybe a safer way of running it, I guess. So.
Speaking as Maggie again. Right, that makes sense. That's what I was wondering. Thanks.
Yeah, and this is Laura again, if I may. One thing that we learned when we were starting to work with the API a lot is it doesn't solve the problem of not having the data you need to have to do the cleanup you need to do. It's not magic. So that's ultimately why we didn't end up using this script, is because we couldn't cleanly get an unambiguous list of this is what's in A space now and this is what should be in A space when the script is complete. So I know a lot of this can feel really uncomfortable to people because, we weren't trained for this. We didn't expect this is what we're going to do, but it is helpful to remember that what you were trained for and what you do have competence in is your collection and the data that's in your collections. So if you don't have a reliable source of this is what it was and this is what it should be, and that's kind of a problem that we are used to solving, right, is handling our data at scale. If you don't have that, the API isn't going to solve the problem for you. It might help give you pieces to make that larger data cleanup problem easier to solve. But yeah, you need good data to be able to clean your data.
So one thing I'd mentioned earlier about the shared boxes. And so one of the things we have one of our collections is extremely large. It's got something like, I think, more than 5,000 boxes in it. And we had to, back when we had Archivist Toolkit, we had to split it up into 10 different collections because it took too long to just open when it was one collection. And but you have those 10 different collections. There are boxes that have files from collection 1 and collection 3 and collection 4. And so when we did the transfer of data, what that meant is that we had, there is like one box 2,500. But in ArchivesSpace, there are, 4 box 2,500s because they see it as 4 different containers attached to 4 different collections. And for other reasons, kind of technical reasons related to Archivist Toolkit, we also had to delete all the barcodes from that collection when we split it up into those 10 collections, which caused later problems. And so one of those was that we couldn't go in and run this script because we had, you have one barcode that is supposed to go into what ArchivesSpace thinks is 4 different containers. And so that's going to cause an error to run. It's going to mess things up. This script does not go in and say, okay, ArchivesSpace, take these 4 containers and merge them into this one container while still being connected to all of these archival objects. That it doesn't do that. All it does is it sticks some data into a field. So as Laura was saying, it's not magic. There are problems. But actually what I did manage in this case, the first script I ran that pulled all the containers, I managed to pull all the containers, and that enabled me to identify the duplicate containers. And that, in that case, I did have to go hand edit them, but you could go in and you could hand edit the duplicate containers, merge those ones together, and then run the script with all of the remaining containers. And that, in that case, actually did work by going in and having to do that sort of initial cleanup of stuff beforehand. So yes, it's not magic. It just sort of, it takes what might take student workers a year. You can do it in, you know, a couple of days. So hopefully anyway.
We don't have any other questions in the chat. We'll give it a couple more seconds. If you have a question, please feel free to chat. And again, you can unmute yourself and chime in now. But I'll go ahead and say thank you again to Vakil. This was really good. And I learned a lot, that's for sure. And you did provide your contact information in the beginning. And if anyone would like to reach out to him, he says he's happy to help, but also there are everything related to the programs that you would need and the scripts are all available via his original blog post, which is on the SAA Research Library section page, and then also within the webinar description. And it will all be included with this recording as well. So all of that will be easy to find and locate. So if there's no other questions, we'll go ahead and stop recording. And
Okay.
Thank you again to Vakil and to Laura.
Yeah, thank you everyone. And Laura, especially thank you. And I'm glad you joined us. And have a nice day, everyone. I'm gonna stop sharing now, okay?
Thanks.